a civilization rivaling ancient Egypt left behind no tales of kings or gods. The Indus Valley civilization mastered city planning, sanitation, and trade across a vast region, only to vanish completely, its story locked in a script no one can read. By the end of this, you will understand not just how a society this advanced disappeared, but what its silent cities warn us about our own world's fragility. We will walk its grid-patterned streets, probe the causes of its collapse, and ask why a people who built for the future left so few clues about themselves. What do you believe is the true measure of a civilization's greatness? The story begins not with a bang, but with a slow, patient gathering. Around 5,300 years ago, the great river systems of the Indus and the were not barren. They were ribbons of life, drawing small communities to their fertile banks. These were not yet cities. They were clusters of homes, places where families farmed and crafted tools, but something was stirring. A collective idea was taking root in the soil. These separate villages began to connect, to share knowledge, to trade resources. It was a quiet convergence, a gradual alignment of human ambition with the rhythm of the rivers. From this humble, almost invisible beginning, an entirely new blueprint for society would emerge. The scale of what they built would remain hidden, however, for the modern world would stumble upon it entirely by accident. In the early 1920s, archaeologists working on a railway line in the Punjab region of British India made a curious find. Laborers were crushing ancient bricks to use as ballast for the tracks. Those bricks, it turned out, were not from some minor medieval settlement. They were the remnants of a massive, meticulously planned city, later named Harappa. Soon after, another site was uncovered hundreds of miles to the southwest, the Mound of the Dead. What they found there did not fit any known historical narrative. Here were vast, grid-patterned cities with sophisticated drainage systems, standardized bricks, and grand public baths, all built by a people who left no pyramids, no giant statues of emperors, and no epic tales of conquest. This civilization was a contemporary of Pharaonic Egypt and the Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia, yet it stood utterly apart in its philosophy. While others celebrated god-kings and military glory in stone, they seemed to have invested their genius in civic order, in public welfare, in creating a functional harmony for thousands of people. Their anonymity became their most haunting feature. They built a world designed to last, yet they forgot to tell us their names. The sheer order of it must have been breathtaking to uncover. As the layers of earth were carefully peeled back at, a geometric masterpiece emerged from the dust. Streets ran perfectly straight, north to south, east to west, intersecting at precise right angles to form a vast, orderly grid. This was not a city that grew organically, twisting and turning over time. It was a city that was designed, conceived as a whole before a single brick was laid, a feat of premeditated urban planning that would not be seen again for thousands of years. Every detail served a purpose. The bricks themselves, whether baked or sun-dried, adhered to a standardized ratio, their uniform dimensions allowing for rapid, efficient construction from one neighborhood to the next. But the true genius lay beneath the streets. A network of covered drains, carefully sloped and lined with brick, channeled away from homes and into larger sewers. Each house had its own bathing area and a chute that connected to this citywide system, a remarkable commitment to public health and sanitation that modern cities would struggle to replicate for centuries. At the heart of this meticulously planned world stood the Great Bath, a large, waterproofed pool built with precisely fitted bricks and a layer of natural tar. Surrounded by a colonnade and rooms, its purpose remains one of the civilization's great mysteries. Was it a site for ritual purification, a communal gathering place, or an early civic institution? What is clear is that this urban blueprint, from the grid to the drains, was not unique too. It was a template, a shared vision of how a society should function, replicated with stunning consistency across the vast Indus Valley. This points to something profound, a centralized idea or authority so powerful it could orchestrate the construction of cities hundreds of miles apart with the same architectural language. They built not for the glory of a single ruler, but for the harmony of the entire community. So what kind of society were they, these master planners who valued civic order above all else? Yet this obsession with order was matched by an astonishing capacity for creation. If it was the civilization's administrative brain, then Harappa was its beating industrial heart. Here, the grid streets led not just to homes, but to sprawling workshops that hummed with activity. The air would have carried the scent of baking clay, the heat of kilns, and the precise tapping of stone against stone. This was a city of makers. Archaeologists uncovered entire districts dedicated to single crafts, from the delicate drilling of carnelian beads to the smelting of copper and the mass production of pottery. The scale was industrial, suggesting not just individual artisans, but organized guilds producing goods for a vast market. Central to this economic engine were the massive, raised platform granaries, strategically located near the river. These were not simple storage pits, but sophisticated warehouses, designed with ventilation ducts to protect a colossal agricultural surplus from rot. This surplus was the true foundation of their power, freeing a large portion of the population from farming to become specialists, traders, and administrators. To facilitate this complex economy, they invented a system of remarkable fairness, standardized weights made of chert stone. These cubes, doubling in a precise progression, have been found from one end of the Indus realm to the other. A merchant in Harappa could weigh out a measure of grain or lapis lazuli using the same weight a trader in a distant coastal town would use, a universal language of commerce that built trust across hundreds of miles. This trust extended far beyond their borders. Exquisite carnelian beads, etched with white patterns, have been found in the royal tombs of in Mesopotamia. Cargoes of timber, cotton cloth, and precious stones flowed across the Arabian Sea. They were not an isolated utopia, but a central node in the ancient world's first global trade network. The few human likenesses they left behind, like the serene stone figure dubbed the priest king, reflect this blend of authority and refinement. His robe, with its trefoil pattern, and his calm, inscrutable gaze speak of a figure steeped in ritual and status, yet he carries no visible weapon. He embodies the Enigma, a leader who derived power not from conquest, but from economic mastery and perhaps spiritual sanction. Their wealth was built on the workshop floor and measured in perfectly balanced stones, a testament to a society that valued equitable exchange as much as elegant design. But to sustain such a far-flung system, they needed something more, a way to communicate across the vast distances between their cities. This necessity would lead to their most enduring and frustrating mystery. The elegant symbols carved into a small soapstone seal present a perfect, silent rebuke. A seated figure, perhaps a deity or a leader, is surrounded by a graceful script, a series of that look like a message waiting to be read. For over a century, the finest minds in linguistics and cryptography have stared at these inscriptions, feeling the profound frustration of confronting a language that refuses to speak. This is the Indus Valley script, a system of over 400 distinct signs, and it remains one of the last great undeciphered codes of the ancient world. Its very existence tells us these people were literate, that they recorded information, but what they chose to record, and why is a secret the stones have kept. The challenge is immense. Unlike the lengthy narratives of Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, Indus inscriptions are almost maddeningly brief. They appear primarily on seals, used for stamping clay tags on trade goods, and on small tablets. Most contain only 4 or 5 characters, with the longest known text having just 26 signs. It is as if we have recovered only the labels and the chapter headings from an entire library, with every single book missing. There is no equivalent of the stone, no bilingual inscription that provides a known key to translate the unknown. This absence has led some scholars to a radical question: is it even a full language at all? Could it be a system of proto-writing, a collection of clan symbols, religious icons, or political emblems that conveyed meaning but not speech in a grammatical sense? The debate is fierce because the answer changes everything. If it is a true script, then the had a rich written culture now lost. If it is not, then they may have achieved their staggering social complexity through other means, through oral tradition and shared cultural codes, making their accomplishment in some ways even more remarkable. Leading theories point in different directions. Some linguists, using computer analysis, argue the patterns of the symbols resemble those of spoken languages, suggesting a Dravidian or other ancient linguistic root. Others look at the context, the seals found in Mesopotamia bearing both Indus script and local cuneiform, hoping for a future discovery that will provide that crucial link. The implications of a successful decipherment are staggering. It would transform these silent artifacts into speaking witnesses. A simple seal inscription could shift from being a mysterious object to a record-reading, property of the grain merchant, or blessed by the river goddess. We could finally hear their names, understand their laws, learn their myths, and comprehend the social structure that held those perfect cities together. The script is the locked door at the center of the mystery. Until we find the key, we can admire the craftsmanship of the door, but we cannot enter the room where their story is kept. This profound silence extends beyond their words to the very fabric of their society, raising an even deeper question about how they maintained such widespread order without the tools of coercion we often associate with ancient empires. The absence of a grand palace at the heart of is more telling than any throne room could ever be. In every other contemporary civilization, the city center was dominated by a single, overwhelming structure, a pharaoh's pyramid, a ziggurat reaching for the gods, a fortified citadel proclaiming the ruler's power. The built differently, their cities showcase a remarkable architectural democracy. While there are larger structures, like the Great Bath and the granaries, the residential neighborhoods tell a different story. Houses, though varying in size, all share the same basic amenities: a courtyard, a bathing area, and access to that sophisticated drainage system. There are no slums huddled in the shadows of a palace, no districts of opulent mansions walled off from the common people. This uniformity suggests a society where wealth and status, while present, did not translate into grotesque displays of inequality. The focus was on the collective infrastructure, on benefits that served the entire community. So who was in charge? The leading theory points not to a single king, but to a council, an oligarchy of elders, priests, or perhaps most intriguingly, a guild of leading merchants. Think of it as a board of directors for an entire civilization. The standardized weights and measures, the organized workshops, the vast trade networks, all point to an administrative mind obsessed with efficiency and standardization, the hallmarks of a mercantile elite. This would have been a practical governance, one focused on maintaining the economic engine that fed and clothed their cities. Evidence for a theocratic rule is subtler. The few seals that depict human-like figures often show them in what appear to be ritual or meditative poses, sometimes surrounded by animals. The famous seal showing a cross-legged figure sometimes called a proto-Shiva, surrounded by a buffalo, a rhinoceros, an elephant, and a tiger, suggests a deep spiritual connection to the natural world. But unlike in Egypt or Mesopotamia, there are no colossal temples dedicated to these possible deities. Their religion, if that is what it was, seems to have been integrated into daily life and personal practice, not used to erect monumental symbols of priestly power. This extends to the complete lack of glorified military art. While other cultures covered their walls with scenes of conquest and subjugation, they left us with images of peaceful processions, animals, and intricate geometric patterns. The few copper weapons found are simple and functional, more like tools for protection than instruments of empire. This creates a compelling portrait of a society that invested its surplus not in monuments to ego or machines of war, but in sewers, baths, and warehouses. They built for comfort, for health, for trade, and for a stable, predictable daily life. Their greatest monument was the city itself, functioning in harmony. Yet this very stability, this intricate balance they achieved, makes their ultimate fate all the more perplexing. How does a society so well engineered, so seemingly resilient, simply cease to be? The annual floods of the Indus were both a promise and a threat. Each year, snowmelt from the distant Himalayas would swell the river into a torrent, bringing the rich silt that fertilized the plains, but also the destructive force that could wipe away everything in its path. To build a lasting civilization here required more than just farming. It demanded a profound, intimate understanding of hydrology. They became master water engineers, and their greatest constructions were not temples, but tools for taming the river itself. Across their territory, they dug extensive networks of canals to divert floodwaters for irrigation, creating the agricultural surplus that fed their millions. Within their cities, they built not just drains to remove water, but intricate systems to conserve it. Dozens of deep, brick-lined wells were sunk into the ground, ensuring a reliable supply even in dry seasons. At the coastal city of, they engineered one of the ancient world's earliest known dockyards, complete with a sophisticated tidal lock gate. This massive brick structure allowed ships to enter and exit the basin regardless of the tide, maintaining a constant water level for safe berthing and loading. It was a feat of maritime engineering that speaks to their global trade ambitions. Their entire society was an exercise in hydrological balance, a delicate dance with the forces of nature. They built reservoirs to store monsoon rains and designed their cities on raised platforms to survive the annual deluge. This mastery over water was the very bedrock of their prosperity, the invisible foundation upon which every grid-patterned street and bustling workshop stood. It is this deep, successful relationship with their environment that makes their disappearance so haunting. For if their civilization was built by controlling water, could it have also fallen when that control was lost? The evidence points to a slow, relentless change in the very landscape they had so perfectly engineered. A single seal found in the ruins of a Mesopotamian palace speaks volumes. It was discovered far from home, in the ancient city of Ur, nestled in the silt of the Euphrates River. To the Mesopotamians, the land from which these exotic goods and mysterious merchants came had a name. This was not a vague, distant place on a map. It was a recognized trading partner, a source of coveted luxury and practical goods that fueled the economies and adorned the elites of another great civilization. The journey between these two worlds was an epic maritime undertaking. Sailors, navigating by the stars and seasonal winds, would have loaded their sturdy, plank-built ships with cargo at ports like. They would then embark on a months-long voyage across the open waters of the Arabian Sea, following the coast of modern-day Oman before sailing up the Persian Gulf to reach the river mouths of the Tigris and Euphrates. It was a Bronze Age shipping lane, bustling with cultural and commercial exchange. So what filled the holds of these ships? The trade was a carefully curated exchange of natural wealth and human craftsmanship. From the Indus Valley came brilliantly etched carnelian beads, their deep red hue and white geometric patterns a signature of artistry. They exported lapis lazuli, the stunning blue stone sourced from distant Afghanistan, which they then worked and traded onward. There was ivory, likely from elephants in the subcontinent, carved into combs, rods, and inlays. Perhaps one of their most revolutionary exports was something we take for granted today: cotton. They were among the world's first to cultivate cotton and weave it into textiles, providing a lightweight, comfortable fabric that was a luxury in the warmer Mesopotamian climate. Alongside these finished goods went practical materials, teak and cedar wood for construction, and precious metals. In return, the merchants would have brought back goods their own land lacked, things like silver, tin for making bronze, and perhaps oils and wines. This was not random barter. It was a sophisticated, long-distance commercial relationship managed by a professional merchant class. The very seals used to stamp and authenticate bales of goods became calling cards in foreign lands. Finding a seal in Mesopotamia is like finding a branded crate in a foreign warehouse today. It is physical proof of a transaction, of a connection that spanned continents. This commercial reach tells us they were not an isolated, inward-looking utopia. They were active, influential participants in the ancient world's first proto-globalized system. Their economic influence was felt in Mesopotamian markets, and their cultural influence, in the form of those distinctive beads and seals, permeated the Gulf region. They were networked, connected, and indispensable. This makes the next chapter of their story all the more difficult to comprehend. For a civilization so deeply woven into the fabric of the Bronze Age world did not simply fade from memory. It unraveled with startling speed. What could possibly sever such vital, far-reaching connections? The true soul of this civilization is not found in its grandest buildings, but in the hands of its makers. Picture an artisan seated in a sunlit workshop, their fingers steady as they press a slender, bow-shaped drill against a bead of deep red carnelian. This stone is harder than steel, yet with a simple tool tipped with diamond dust, they would patiently, over hours, bore a perfect, microscopic hole from one end to the other. This was not just craft, it was a form of alchemy, transforming raw stone into objects of breathtaking beauty and immense value. Their technological prowess was the engine of their economy and the signature of their culture. In metallurgy, they were masters of the lost wax technique. A sculptor would first create a detailed figurine, perhaps of a dancing girl or a small bull, out of beeswax. This wax model would be encased in clay, forming a mold. When heated, the wax would melt and drain away, leaving a hollow cavity into which molten bronze could be poured. Once cooled, the clay mold was broken away to reveal a perfect, solid metal replica. This process allowed for incredible detail and was used to produce everything from tools to works of art. Their pottery tells another story of mass production and aesthetic taste. Using fast-turning wheels, potters created vast quantities of vessels, often adorning them with striking black pigment on a red slip background. The designs were geometric, sometimes featuring peacocks, fish, or pipal leaves, applied with a confident, fluid hand. But perhaps the most telling sign of their industrial mindset was the standardization of everyday objects. From copper knives and fish hooks to the chert weights used in every market, items were produced to uniform specifications. A brick from would fit perfectly with a brick from Harappa, hundreds of miles away. This was a society that had perfected the concept of interchangeable parts before the modern factory. The scale of their bead making alone is staggering, with workshops producing thousands of steatite, faience, and carnelian beads in standardized shapes and sizes. This level of organized, specialized labor required not just skill, but a sophisticated social structure that trained artisans, managed supply chains, and distributed finished goods across a continent. Each finely drilled bead, each perfectly balanced weight, each elegantly potted vessel was a silent argument for a society built on precision, quality, and a shared understanding of excellence. Their technological genius did not scream from monuments, it whispered from the objects they used in daily life and traded to the world. Yet for all this tangible mastery, one of their most profound creations remains utterly intangible, a mystery locked in symbols. Descending the steps into the Great Bath feels like entering a different kind of sanctuary. The air grows still, the noise of the imagined city fades, and you are surrounded by precise, watertight brickwork. There are no grand statues here, no inscriptions praising a god-king, only the quiet geometry of the pool, the surrounding colonnade, and rows of small, private rooms. This absence of obvious religious iconography is what makes the space so powerfully spiritual. Without a single written word, the architecture itself suggests a society for whom ritual was about purification, community, and inner reflection, not public spectacle. The Great Bath was not hidden away. It was integrated into the very heart of the city's citadel, a civic and possibly sacred center accessible to many. This points to a profound idea that for the spiritual practice may have been woven into the fabric of daily life and public welfare, inseparable from the act of keeping a city clean, ordered, and harmonious. Their most significant temple might have been the entire city itself, functioning in a sacred balance. So where else do we find echoes of their beliefs? The search turns from grand architecture to smaller, more intimate objects. Across sites, archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of figurines, often crudely molded but full of character. Many depict women with elaborate headdresses and wide hips. Earlier interpretations quickly labeled these mother goddesses, symbols of fertility and abundance. While this is possible, it is also a projection. They could just as easily be representations of actual women, revered ancestors, or even popular toys. Their very ambiguity is a lesson, reminding us that we see their world through the lens of our own assumptions. A far more compelling clue comes from a small, square seal. Carved into its surface is a figure seated in a clear cross-legged posture, heels pressed together, hands resting on the knees. The posture is unmistakably one of meditation or discipline. The figure has 3 faces, is crowned with horns, and is surrounded by animals: a powerful elephant, a fierce tiger, a heavy rhinoceros, and a mighty buffalo. This seal has sparked endless fascination, with some scholars seeing in it a prototype for the later Hindu deity Shiva, the lord of yoga, animals, and asceticism. Whether this connection is direct or not is less important than what the image reveals. It shows a culture that contemplated a figure of immense spiritual or ritual authority, one associated with mastery over the self and the natural world, not with weapons or conquest. This figure, like the Great Bath, embodies calm, centered power. There are other hints of ritual life: small fire altars found in some courtyards, suggestive of domestic offerings, and the intriguing complex dubbed the College of Priests, which may have been a center for ritual or administrative learning. Yet nothing coalesces into a clear, unified religion like those of Egypt or Mesopotamia. This may be the greatest clue of all. The spiritual world seems decentralized, possibly practiced in the home, in small neighborhood shrines, or in civic spaces like the bath. It was a piety of practice rather than proclamation, integrated into the rhythms of commerce, craftsmanship, and community governance. Their faith, if we can call it that, might have been in the system itself, in the sacred order of clean water, fair trade, and a well-run city. This deep, quiet integration may have been their greatest strength, the spiritual glue that held their society together. But it also meant that when the physical foundations of that society began to tremble, there was no centralized religious hierarchy to hold people together, no grand temple ideology to rally around. Their resilience was woven into the everyday, and so too, perhaps, was their vulnerability. Their mastery over water was a profound, generations-long conversation with the rivers. But what happens when the river itself stops answering? The greatest threat to the Indus Valley civilization may not have been a sudden invasion or a cataclysm, but a slow, relentless change in the sky above them. This is the story of a slow burn catastrophe, where the environment itself gradually its support. For centuries, the lifeblood of the region was the monsoon, the annual cycle of rains that filled the rivers and soaked the fields. Paleoclimatic data, gathered from ancient seabeds and lake cores, tells a troubling story. Over hundreds of years, these monsoon patterns began to weaken. The rains became less reliable, the downpours less intense. This was not a single bad season, it was a climatic shift playing out over generations, so gradual that it might have been almost imperceptible to any one person's lifetime. Yet its cumulative effect was devastating. The mighty river system, which ran parallel to the Indus and supported countless settlements along its banks, appears to have begun to dry up, its waters retreating and its channels silting over. This was not just a river disappearing, it was an entire economic and agricultural corridor fading from the map. Imagine the slow, creeping anxiety that would have settled over the land. A well that once reached water now finds only dry earth. A canal network, perfectly engineered for a different era, stands empty under a baking sun. The agricultural surplus that fed the cities and fueled long-distance trade begins to dwindle. Year after year, the harvests grow more uncertain. This environmental stress would have placed an unbearable strain on the very foundations of society. The intricate trade networks that brought in tin, copper, and luxury goods would have frayed as internal production faltered. The authority of the merchant councils or elders, built on their ability to manage plenty, would have been undermined by scarcity. The social contract, the unspoken agreement that held those grid-patterned cities together, was based on predictability and shared benefit. As the rivers shrank and the fields produced less, that contract began to tear. Communities faced impossible choices. Do we stay and try to adapt, digging deeper wells and shifting crops, or do we gather what we can and move, following the retreating water sources? Evidence suggests they did both. The large, centralized cities like and Harappa show signs of a gradual, managed abandonment. The sophisticated drainage systems fell into disrepair. New, cruder structures were sometimes built atop the old, precise brickwork, a sign of diminished resources and technical knowledge. Meanwhile, populations appear to have shifted eastward and southward, toward the more reliable rainfall of the Ganges Basin and the resources of the peninsula. They did not vanish in a day. They fragmented, their grand urban experiment dissolving as people returned to smaller, more sustainable village life. This theory presents a humbling lesson about civilization itself. They were not defeated by a more powerful enemy. They were slowly, patiently undone by a change in the climate they could not engineer their way out of. Their story becomes a testament to the vulnerability of even the most advanced societies when the natural systems they depend on begin to fail. Yet, as we will see, the changing climate may not have been the only actor in this long goodbye. Even the most stable ground can betray its inhabitants. While the monsoon faded slowly, the earth beneath the cities may have moved with sudden, catastrophic violence. Geological evidence points to a period of significant tectonic activity in the region, a time when the very bones of the landscape were shifting. The Indus River sits in a seismically active zone, where the Indian tectonic plate continues its relentless push northward into Asia. A major earthquake, or a series of them, could have done more than just topple walls. It could have rewritten the geography itself. Imagine the river, that vital artery, being choked or diverted by a massive landslide triggered by a quake. Its course could have been flung miles away from the cities that depended on it, leaving their intricate canal networks high and dry, pointing uselessly toward an empty channel. Conversely, a tectonic shift could have the river upstream, creating a temporary lake that, when it finally burst, would have unleashed a biblical flood downstream. There is intriguing, albeit debated, evidence of layers of silt and rubble that some researchers argue point to multiple catastrophic inundations, events that could have broken the spirit of a city already stressed by drought. Even without a single cataclysm, the rivers were constantly writing and rewriting their own stories in silt. The brilliant irrigation canals, which fed their fields for centuries, carried a hidden cost. Each season, water flowing through these channels deposited fine sediment. Over generations, this siltation would have slowly raised the canal beds, making them less efficient and eventually useless. Maintaining them required constant, organized dredging, a massive communal effort. As the social fabric frayed under climatic stress, that maintenance may have lapsed. The very systems that defined their civilization could have become clogged relics, their hydraulic genius turning into a trap. An engineered canal that cannot be cleaned is just a muddy trench. This combination of geological forces, both sudden and gradual, presents a sobering scenario. They had built a world in delicate equilibrium with a specific riverine environment. When that environment changed, whether by the sky withholding rain or the earth redirecting water, their greatest adaptations became liabilities. Their cities were masterpieces of fixed infrastructure in a world that proved it was not fixed at all. This invites a profound question about resilience. Is a civilization's strength measured by its grandest constructions, or by its ability to abandon them and adapt for a long time? The silence of the Indus Valley was filled with a single, powerful story. This was the Aryan migration theory, a narrative that proposed a dramatic end to the world. It suggested that around 3,500 years ago, nomadic, horse-riding pastoralists speaking an early form of Sanskrit migrated into the subcontinent from the northwest. In this telling, these newcomers, calling themselves or nobles, swept across the land, conquering the established cities of the dark-skinned, and bringing with them the Vedas, the foundational texts of Hinduism. For much of the 20th century, this invasion model was the accepted explanation, neatly tying the end of one civilization to the rise of another. The evidence seemed to fit. The Vedas spoke of conflicts, of forts being destroyed, and of a people mastering the horse and chariot, technologies not clearly present in mature sites. Linguists traced connections between Sanskrit and ancient European languages like Greek and Latin, pointing to a shared ancestral tongue spoken somewhere on the Eurasian steppes. The theory provided a clear cause and effect, a violent transition of power that explained the cultural shift from the urban, possibly goddess-worshipping, to the pastoral, fire-worshipping Vedic society. It was a compelling story of clash and conquest. But a compelling story is not always a true one, and this particular narrative carries a deeply problematic history. The idea of a superior Aryan race bringing civilization to a lesser people was enthusiastically adopted and distorted by European colonial scholars in the 19th century. It was used to suggest that the glories of Indian culture were not indigenous, but imported, a notion that served to legitimize foreign rule. This colonial baggage immediately casts a long shadow over the entire theory, forcing us to separate political ideology from archaeological fact. And when we look at the ground, the evidence for a violent, civilization-ending invasion simply evaporates. At sites like, the final layers do not show the hallmarks of conquest. There are no vast arsenals of new weapons, no layers of catastrophic burning concentrated in a single period, no clear signs of a sudden, destructive onslaught. The decline appears gradual, a slow fading rather than a fiery collapse. Furthermore, there is a profound cultural disconnect. The Vedic texts are intensely focused on ritual, sacrifice, and pastoral life, with almost no mention of the brick cities, the elaborate drainage, or the maritime trade that defined them. It is as if the newcomers entered a landscape of ruins whose original purpose they did not understand or chose not to record. This lack of direct evidence has led most contemporary archaeologists to reject the invasion hypothesis outright. The story of a catastrophic war of conquest, it seems, was a myth layered atop a much more complex and far more interesting historical reality. So if it was not a dramatic replacement, what was the true nature of the encounter between the old world of the Indus and the new voices from the steppe? The weights found in later layers tell their own quiet story of decay. Those perfect chert cubes, once the bedrock of trust across a continent, begin to show slight variations. A weight meant to be one standard unit is now a fraction heavier or lighter, as if the careful hands that made them no longer remembered the exact measure or no longer cared to enforce it. This small slippage is a profound signal, a tremor in the very foundations of order. The meticulous standardization that defined their world was unraveling from within. Walk through the final days and you would see the symptoms of a slow social fatigue. The magnificent covered drains, that marvel of public health, start to clog with debris. Broken sections are patched with whatever is at hand, not with the precisely fitted bricks of the original builders. In the residential quarters, the elegant uniformity of the old grid breaks down. New walls are thrown up at odd angles, subdividing courtyards and encroaching upon public streets. It is the architecture of expediency, not of a shared civic vision. The city, once a single, harmonious machine, is becoming a collection of disconnected, struggling neighborhoods. This suggests a catastrophic failure of the centralized authority that had orchestrated this urban symphony for centuries. Whether it was a council of elders, a guild of merchants, or a priestly class, that governing body lost its ability to command labor, to organize maintenance, and to enforce the standards that made their civilization work. But why would such a sophisticated system of control simply evaporate? The causes were likely a vicious cycle, each problem feeding the next. As the monsoons failed and trade routes faltered, the economic surplus that paid for civic upkeep would have dried up. With less wealth flowing through the granaries and workshops, the social contract frayed. Why should a potter or a farmer contribute their labor to clean a citywide drain if the grain stores were empty and the merchants had nothing to trade? Resources once dedicated to the common good were now hoarded for individual or family survival. This shift from collective to individual interest is the death knell for any complex society. We see no evidence of mass violence or revolution, no sacked palaces or streets littered with the tools of conflict. Instead, we see a gradual, grinding descent into pragmatic localism. The grand idea of the city itself was being abandoned. People did not die out, they simply made a different, quieter choice. They voted with their feet, leaving the increasingly dysfunctional urban centers for the countryside. This was not a disappearance, but a strategic retreat, a urbanization. The knowledge of brick-making and metallurgy did not vanish, it diffused. The populations shifted eastward and southward, carrying their skills into the Ganges Basin and the Indian Peninsula, where they blended with other cultures and adapted to new environments. The great civilization did not end with a bang, but with a long, slow exhalation. Its people did not vanish, they transformed, their grand structure dissolving back into the regional tapestry from which it had once brilliantly emerged. This fragmentation is perhaps the most human part of their story, a reminder that sometimes, when the center cannot hold, resilience means knowing when to let an old form go and build something new, closer to the earth. The crowded streets that were once a sign of prosperity could have become a terrifying vulnerability. A society built on dense urban living and sophisticated water management may have faced an invisible enemy, one that thrived in the very conditions of its success. While no mass burial sites or skeletal evidence point conclusively to a single plague, the possibility of widespread illness remains a haunting part of the decline. Consider the environment of a late city. The population density was high. People lived in close quarters, and many kept domesticated animals like cattle, water buffalo, and fowl nearby. This constant, intimate contact between species is a classic recipe for diseases, where pathogens can jump from animals to humans. Now layer on the growing strain on their greatest achievement, the water system. As social organization weakened and maintenance lapsed, those brilliant covered drains could have become clogged. Stagnant water might have pooled in neighborhoods, creating breeding grounds for mosquitoes and waterborne parasites. A well that served a community could have been contaminated by seepage from a failing latrine. In such a scenario, the marvels of urban engineering could have slowly turned against their creators. The result would not have been a single dramatic event, but a creeping demographic crisis. A series of outbreaks, perhaps of malaria, cholera, or other infectious illnesses, would have taken a relentless toll. Each season could have brought a new wave of hardship, steadily reducing the population. The impact would have been catastrophic on multiple levels. A shrinking labor force means fewer hands to bring in the harvest, maintain the canals, or produce trade goods. The loss of specialized artisans, administrators, and traders would have caused a rapid erosion of knowledge and social complexity. But perhaps the deepest wound would have been to the community's spirit. Watching neighbors and family members fall ill without understanding why would have shattered trust and social cohesion. The shared belief in the system, in the order of the city itself, would have broken under the weight of fear and loss. Why stay in a place that seems to be making you sick? In this light, the gradual abandonment of the great cities takes on a new, tragic dimension. It may have been a desperate act of self-preservation. Families and clans, seeking cleaner water and more space, would have fled the urban centers for the countryside, accelerating the fragmentation. This biological dimension does not act alone, it intertwines with the climatic and social stresses. A population already weakened by nutritional stress from failing crops would have been far more susceptible to disease. A society already questioning its leaders would have had little resilience when faced with a health catastrophe. It becomes a perfect storm, where environmental change, economic strain, and biological vulnerability converge, making the once unthinkable, the abandonment of a 1,000-year project, not just possible, but inevitable. The silence in the ruins is not just an absence of words, but perhaps also an echo of a profound and collective exhaustion. The idea of a total vanishing is a powerful myth, but the truth is far more subtle and enduring. The late period, spanning several centuries after the great cities emptied, reveals not an ending, but a profound transformation. The grand urban experiment was over, but the people, their skills, and their cultural memory did not evaporate. Instead of a single, brilliant light going out, imagine that light breaking into 1,000 smaller flames, carried eastward and southward, each still burning with a familiar warmth. The population did not perish, it decentralized. People migrated from the stressed river valleys of the Indus and toward the more reliable waters of the Ganges Basin and the resource-rich lands of Gujarat and Rajasthan. In these new homes, they did not attempt to rebuild. They adapted, establishing smaller, more sustainable villages and towns, their lives reoriented around local ecology rather than grand civic planning. This was not a collapse of culture, but a strategic shift in its scale and expression. The evidence for this continuity is etched in the very objects they left behind. The distinctive pottery of the mature period, with its red slip and black painted motifs of peacocks, pipal leaves, and geometric patterns, did not suddenly stop. Its style evolved gradually, becoming slightly less refined, but still clearly recognizable in late villages hundreds of miles from the original urban centers. The craft technologies that defined their economic power also persisted. The art of drilling long, perfect holes through hard carnelian beads, a signature skill, continued in regions like Gujarat. The knowledge of metallurgy, of creating bronze figurines using the lost wax technique, was passed down through generations. These were not forgotten arts. They were a living inheritance, now serving smaller, more localized communities. Perhaps the most intriguing threads of continuity are those that hint at spiritual or ideological legacy. The iconic seals depicting meditative figures and powerful animals ceased to be produced, but the ideas they represented may have diffused into the cultural subconscious. The reverence for certain symbols, like the pipal tree or the bull, appears in later Indian art and tradition. The concept of ritual purification, so strongly suggested by the Great Bath, finds echoes in the importance of bathing and flowing water in subsequent South Asian religious practice. This reframes the entire narrative. The Indus Valley civilization did not meet a catastrophic, conclusive end. It underwent a process of cultural metamorphosis, a slow blending and adaptation. Its essence was not destroyed, but dissolved into the wider stream of South Asian history, becoming a foundational, if nearly invisible, layer in the cultural geology of the subcontinent. It became a ghost in the machine, its patterns and preferences subtly influencing the shape of things to come, a testament to the fact that a civilization's true legacy is often measured not by the endurance of its stones, but by the persistence of its ideas in the minds of its descendants. The most powerful legacy of a civilization is not always written in stone, but often laid beneath the streets. Walk through any modern city built on a rational grid, and you are unconsciously retracing a pattern first perfected in the Indus Valley over 4,000 years ago. Their decision to organize space with straight, intersecting streets was not merely an aesthetic choice. It was a revolutionary act of social engineering. It created predictable traffic flow, land division, and made the city legible and navigable for everyone, from a visiting trader to a local resident. This fundamental blueprint for order, prioritizing function and accessibility, became a cornerstone of urban planning, echoing from the classical cities of the Roman Empire to the orderly avenues of modern metropolises. It speaks to a profound understanding that the structure of a city shapes the daily life and interactions of its people. Yet their most transformative gift to future generations lies even deeper, completely out of sight. The intricate network of covered drains and private bathing areas in every home represents the world's first known integrated public sanitation system. This was a staggering leap in civic thought, a formal recognition that public health was a collective responsibility, not an individual concern. They understood that waste management was not a private nuisance to be ignored, but a public challenge to be solved with engineering. By designing a system that removed efficiently from populated areas, they were directly combating disease and creating a more livable environment for thousands. This principle, that a city's greatness is measured by the health and dignity it provides its most ordinary citizens, is a civic ideal we still strive to achieve today. Their entire hydraulic philosophy, from the conservation of water in deep wells to the management of monsoon floods, framed water not as a threat to be feared, but as a precious resource to be meticulously managed. They built their society around a dialogue with water, ensuring its availability for drinking, its control for agriculture, and its removal for sanitation. This holistic view of water management, balancing utility with public welfare, is perhaps their most relevant lesson for our own era of climate uncertainty. In an age where ancient empires are remembered for pyramids and palaces, the choice is quietly radical. They invested their surplus and their genius not in monuments to power, but in infrastructure for people. The Great Bath was a public facility, the granaries secured a food supply, the standardized weights ensured fair trade. Their monumental architecture was the city itself, functioning smoothly. This offers a timeless lesson in civic priority, a reminder that the most enduring legacies are those that serve the fundamental, daily needs of a community. Their silent cities ask us a poignant question: what does it truly mean for a civilization to be advanced? Is it the height of its towers, or the depth of its commitment to the collective well-being of every person who walks its streets? A modern potter's hands shaping clay in a village today connect to a lineage over 4,000 years old. While the grand cities faded, the cultural seeds planted by the did not wither. They took root in the soil of the subcontinent and grew into the vast, branching tree of South Asian tradition. This is not a story of direct inheritance, but of subtle, persistent echoes, a cultural memory absorbed into the very rhythm of life. Look at a simple figurine from a contemporary Indian village fair, its rounded form and expressive eyes, and you cannot help but see a faint reflection of those ancient mother goddess figures. The material is the same, the craft is similar, and the intent, to capture an essence of fertility, protection, or devotion, feels familiar across the. It speaks to an unbroken thread of craft and symbolic expression that survived the collapse of the state that first perfected it. Certain motifs seem to whisper from one age to the next. The pipal tree, with its distinctive heart-shaped leaves, appears repeatedly on pottery. This same tree, the sacred fig, would later become revered in Buddhism as the Bodhi tree of enlightenment and remains a sacred symbol in Hinduism and Jainism. The reverence for powerful animals like the bull, the elephant, and the tiger, so prominently featured on seals, finds a direct parallel in their venerated status in later Indian culture, where they are associated with deities and cosmic power. These are not random coincidences. They suggest a deep-seated symbolic language that was preserved and repurposed, its original meaning perhaps forgotten, but its emotional and spiritual resonance enduring. The most tantalizing of these echoes is found on that small, square seal. The figure seated in a yogic posture, surrounded by animals with an apparent third eye and a horned headdress, presents an image that feels startlingly familiar. To later eyes, it seems to foreshadow Shiva, the Hindu god of meditation, asceticism, and lord of the beasts. Scholars rightly caution us against drawing a straight line. Labeling this figure Proto-Shiva imposes a later identity onto an ancient symbol whose true name we will never know. Yet the visual and conceptual parallels are too compelling to ignore. It suggests that certain core ideas about a meditative mastery over the self and nature, about a divine figure embodying both creation and destruction, were circulating in the spiritual imagination of the subcontinent long before they were systematized in Sanskrit texts. They may not have invented Hinduism, but they likely contributed fragments to its mosaic. They're likely goddess-centered figurines, their apparent rituals involving water and fire, their symbolic vocabulary of trees and animals, all seeped into the cultural groundwater. As new peoples arrived and new languages emerged, these fragments were picked up, reinterpreted, and woven into new tapestries of belief. The Great Bath finds its spiritual descendant not in a specific temple, but in the entire concept of a sacred ford or bathing place in a river, central to Hindu pilgrimage. Their focus on civic cleanliness and water management translates into a religious emphasis on ritual purity and the sacredness of flowing water. This is how civilizations truly endure, not through the permanence of their politics, but through the persistence of their cultural DNA. They stopped building cities, but they never stopped influencing how people saw the world around them. Their legacy is not a list of kings or a set of laws, but a collection of patterns, symbols, and inclinations that became part of the subconscious grammar of an entire civilization. They remind us that the most powerful ideas are those that become so embedded in daily life and spiritual practice that their origin is forgotten, yet their shape continues to guide the hands of potters, the postures of yogis, and the prayers of millions. The quiet plains of Pakistan now hum with a different kind of energy, one generated not by ancient workshops, but by the precise pulse of ground-penetrating radar. This is the new frontier of Indus Valley archaeology, where the mysteries of the past are being probed with tools from the future. Where researchers once relied on shovels and sieves, they now deploy satellites orbiting high above the Earth. From that vantage point, multispectral imaging can detect subtle variations in soil moisture and vegetation, revealing the ghostly outlines of buried walls, streets, and entire settlements invisible to the naked eye. Even more profound, this eye in the sky has helped map the channels of the vanished river, tracing its ancient path across what is now desert, and providing stunning visual evidence for the climate catastrophe that may have strangled the civilization's heartland. This technology allows archaeologists to see the big picture, to understand the vast network of smaller towns and villages that supported the great cities, painting a far more complete and interconnected portrait of society than ever before. The science continues at the microscopic level, in the quiet of a laboratory. Here, a shard of pottery or a fragment of a human tooth becomes a time capsule. Through a process called isotopic analysis, scientists can read the chemical signatures locked within these objects. By analyzing the strontium isotopes in a tooth enamel, for instance, they can determine where an individual grew up, tracing lifetime migration patterns. Did the person buried in later levels come from the distant highlands, perhaps a trader who settled far from home? Similarly, analyzing the residues inside a ceramic pot can reveal what it once held, whether it was grains from local fields, dairy products, or even traces of traded wine from Mesopotamia. This turns anonymous artifacts into biographies, allowing us to reconstruct individual life stories, trade connections, and dietary habits with astonishing clarity. We are no longer just studying a civilization, we are beginning to meet its people, one molecular clue at a time. Perhaps the most powerful new tool is not a physical instrument, but a digital one. Advanced computer modeling allows researchers to build virtual simulations of the world. They can input data on climate patterns, river flow, agricultural yields, and population growth to create dynamic models of how the civilization might have developed. They can then introduce variables, like a 20% decrease in monsoon rainfall over a century, and watch how the simulation responds. Does trade contract first? Do populations begin to cluster around certain reliable wells? Does social unrest increase as resources dwindle? These models do not give definitive answers, but they allow archaeologists to test theories about the collapse in a risk-free environment, exploring scenarios of environmental stress, economic failure, and social fragmentation in ways that pure excavation never could. It turns the story of the Indus Valley from a static puzzle into a living system, where we can observe the potential domino effects that led from prosperity to decline. This fusion of satellite data, lab science, and digital simulation represents a paradigm shift. It means that every square mile of the Indus Valley is now a potential site of discovery, without a single trowel breaking the soil. It promises a future where we may finally understand the true scale of their trade networks, the seasonal movements of their pastoralists, and the precise timing of their urban abandonment. The silent cities are beginning to whisper their secrets, not in a language of symbols, but in the universal codes of chemistry, physics, and data. The greatest mystery of the Indus Valley is no longer just an archaeological enigma. It is a scientific frontier, proving that some of the most profound conversations with the past are just beginning. The dust of centuries is still being brushed away by careful hands at this very moment. While we piece together theories from old discoveries, the ground itself continues to yield fresh, startling evidence, rewriting the narrative of the Indus Valley with each new digging season. The story is far from finished. At the forefront of this ongoing exploration is a sprawling site in the Indian state of Haryana. Once considered a large town, recent excavations have revealed it to be one of the largest known cities, even surpassing in its total area. Here, archaeologists work methodically, their trowels and brushes uncovering not just more of the familiar grid pattern, but unexpected structures that deepen the mystery. They have found extensive workshop areas for bead making and metallurgy, confirming the city's industrial might, but also a series of fire altars and what appears to be a possible ritual complex, offering tantalizing new clues about their spiritual practices. Each layer of soil removed is a page turned in a manuscript we are only beginning to read. The most profound revelations, however, have come not from bricks and beads, but from something much more intimate. Researchers recovered skeletal remains from burial sites. From these ancient bones, scientists were able to extract genetic material, conducting the first successful DNA study of an individual from the mature Indus Valley civilization. The results, published just a few years ago, were groundbreaking. The genetic data showed no detectable ancestry from the pastoralist steppe populations often associated with later migrations into the region. This individual's genetic profile was distinct, with deep roots in the subcontinent, tracing back to earlier local hunter-gatherers. This single genome does not tell the whole story of an entire civilization, of course, but it is a powerful piece of evidence. It strongly suggests that the foundational population of this great urban culture was indigenous, challenging older narratives that depended entirely on outside influence for its origins. It reinforces the idea of a homegrown genius, a sophisticated society that evolved from the very soil and people of the region. Every active dig site holds this potential for revolution. In the vast, arid landscape of Gujarat, teams are uncovering a network of smaller settlements and seasonal camps, revealing how the civilization adapted to diverse environments beyond the great river valleys. Along the now-dry channel, surveys using satellite imagery guide archaeologists to previously unknown sites, promising to map the full extent of this lost river's civilization. Each discovery, whether a new type of seal, an unfamiliar pottery style, or the layout of a neighborhood, adds a new sentence, a new paragraph, to a history we thought we understood. This constant revision is the very heartbeat of archaeology. It reminds us that the past is not a static exhibit behind glass, but a living conversation. A single artifact, lying undisturbed for 4,000 years, can be unearthed tomorrow and force us to rethink everything we thought we knew about trade, social structure, or decline. The silent cities have not yet finished speaking. Their greatest secrets may still be waiting, buried just beneath the next layer of earth, for the brush of an archaeologist's hand to bring them back into the light. Standing beside the pyramids of Giza, the cities feel like they belong to an entirely different species of civilization. To truly grasp their uniqueness, we must place them on the same stage as their great contemporaries, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Yellow River Valley. Each of these cultures was building its own version of a complex society, yet the blueprint that followed was radically their own. The most immediate contrast is written in stone, or rather, in its absence. In Egypt, the ultimate expression of power and piety was the pyramid, a colossal, singular monument pointing to the heavens, built for the glory and afterlife of a divine king. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurat served a similar purpose, a massive stepped temple reaching toward the gods, dominating the city's skyline and proclaiming the authority of its priests and rulers. The built no such structures. Their largest constructions were the Great Bath, a public utility, and the granaries, buildings for storing communal wealth. This is a fundamental divergence in philosophy. While others invested their greatest labor and resources in vertical monuments to authority, they invested horizontally in the ground-level infrastructure that served the entire community. Their monument was the functioning city itself. This distinction extends to the very shape of urban life. Cities in Mesopotamia and Egypt often grew organically. They expanded from a central temple or palace complex, with streets winding and twisting over time, a reflection of gradual, layered development. And Harappa present the opposite vision. Their strict grid pattern, laid out before major construction began, speaks of a top-down, centralized plan. It is the difference between a city that happens and a city that is designed. This planned order reflects a priority for efficiency, predictability, and perhaps a kind of social equity. While a winding street in might hide stark divides between wealthy districts and slums, the grid, with its uniformly equipped houses, suggests a flatter social hierarchy, or at least one where inequality was not flaunted in neighborhood geography. The contrast becomes most poignant when we consider the voices of these civilizations. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, we hear their stories directly. Hieroglyphs and cuneiform have been deciphered, allowing us to read royal decrees, epic poetry, law codes, and personal letters. We know the names of their gods, their kings, their fears, and their triumphs. The Indus Valley offers only a haunting silence. Their script remains a locked door, their seals and tablets presenting brief, enigmatic messages we cannot read. This silence denies us the personal narratives, but in doing so, it forces us to judge them by their deeds rather than their words. We see a society that left records of weights and measures, not conquests, a people who documented trade, not tribute. This comparative view reveals they were not a primitive version of Egypt or Mesopotamia, they were a fully realized alternative. They represent a distinct pathway in the early experiment of statehood. While others developed models centered on theocratic kingship, militaristic expansion, and monumental glorification of the elite, the Indus Valley seems to have pioneered a more collective, utilitarian, and mercantile model. Their power was derived from economic integration, standardized administration, and civic welfare. They offer us a compelling what-if, a vision of an ancient world where the measure of a civilization's greatness was not the height of its tombs, but the depth of its commitment to the common good. Their legacy asks us to expand our definition of what an advanced society can look like, reminding us that human progress has never traveled a single, predetermined road. The discovery of a seal in a Mesopotamian city presents a puzzle wrapped in an enigma. On one hand, it is undeniable proof of contact, a physical object that made a journey across the ancient seas. On the other, the civilization that produced that seal feels utterly alien when compared to its trading partners. This brings us to a profound debate that echoes through all of human history, the question of diffusion versus independent invention. Did great ideas spread from a single source, carried by traders and travelers? Or did different cultures, facing similar challenges, arrive at similar brilliant solutions entirely on their own. The Indus Valley sits at the heart of this debate, offering compelling evidence for both sides. The contact with Mesopotamia is documented, not just by that lone seal, but by trade goods and cultural traces in both regions. Yet, when you place the blueprint of next to the winding streets of Ur, or compare the serene figurines to the grandiose statues of Egyptian pharaohs, the differences are far more striking than the similarities. This is not a case of one civilization copying another. The script is unlike any other. Their city planning, with its obsessive grid and underground drains, has no direct parallel in the contemporary world. Their system of standardized weights, while serving a similar purpose to those in Mesopotamia, follows its own unique mathematical progression. These were not imported ideas, they were homegrown innovations, developed to solve the specific problems of living in the Indus River basin. The evidence suggests a middle path, one of selective borrowing and brilliant adaptation. They were clearly part of a connected ancient world, aware of technologies and styles beyond their borders. They likely exchanged concepts, perhaps the basic idea of writing from seeing Mesopotamian cuneiform or metallurgical techniques from across the Iranian plateau. But what they did with those seeds of inspiration was entirely their own. They did not build ziggurats, they built granaries. They did not inscribe epic poems, they stamped concise symbols on trade seals. They took the concept of urban living and reinvented it according to a different set of values, one prioritizing civic order and public health over monumental glory. This independent streak is their greatest testament. It shows that human ingenuity is not a single river flowing from one source, but a vast delta with many channels, each finding its own way to the sea. They remind us that civilization is not a recipe to be followed, but a challenge to be answered, and they crafted an answer that was uniquely, magnificently theirs. Their story reinforces a powerful idea that across the globe, in isolation or in contact, human minds are capable of parallel brilliance, of looking at the same fundamental problems, from farming to governing to building community, and arriving at beautifully different solutions. Those figures with their wide hips and elaborate headdresses are some of the most common objects we find in ruins. For decades, they were quickly labeled mother goddesses, symbols of a fertility cult that placed the feminine principle at the center of spiritual life. But this interpretation is a classic case of us seeing what we want to see. The truth is, we have no idea what these figurines meant to the people who made them. They could represent deities, yes, but they could just as easily be depictions of revered ancestors, popular storytellers, respected, or even cherished toys for children. To call them all goddesses is to flatten a rich and unknown cultural landscape into a single, familiar idea. The real story they tell is not about a specific belief, but about presence. The sheer number of these female representations, often crafted with care and found in domestic spaces, suggests that images of women were a regular, visible part of daily life. This stands in quiet contrast to other ancient civilizations, where public art was overwhelmingly dominated by images of male rulers, warriors, and gods. In the Indus Valley, the feminine form was something commonly molded from clay, held in the hand, and kept in the home. This simple fact opens a door to a different kind of social imagination. To understand power, we must also look at how people were laid to rest. Burial practices often reflect a society's deepest values about status and equality. In cemeteries, archaeologists have uncovered a striking pattern. While grave goods vary, showing differences in wealth or occupation, there is no clear, systematic evidence that men were consistently buried with more prestige items than women. Some female burials contain necklaces of carnelian and steatite beads, shell bangles, and copper mirrors, indicating personal adornment and access to valuable goods. Male burials might include tools or pottery. The variation seems more individual or familial than strictly gendered. Crucially, there is an absence of the dramatic disparities seen elsewhere. where warrior chieftains were interred with chariots and weapons, while women and servants were laid to rest with little or nothing. This relative parity in death hints at a relative parity in life. It suggests that while social stratification existed, it may not have been rigidly defined by biological sex. A person's role in the community, perhaps as a merchant, an artisan, or a ritual specialist, might have been a greater determinant of their status than whether they were a man or a woman. This leads us to the economic heart of the civilization, its workshops and trade. Consider the bead maker's craft, that patient, precise work of drilling carnelian, or the potter shaping vessels on a fast wheel, or the weaver creating cotton textiles for export. Many of these tasks do not require great physical strength, but immense skill, patience, and artistic sense. There is no archaeological reason to assume these roles were exclusive to one gender. In fact, in many traditional societies, crafts like pottery and weaving are often domains where women hold significant expertise and economic influence. If women were active participants in this prolific craft economy, producing goods that were traded across continents, they would have held tangible economic power. Their work would have contributed directly to the family's wealth and the city's prosperity. This is a form of status that is quiet but profound, woven into the very fabric of daily production rather than proclaimed on monuments. It is a power built on skill and utility, values that demonstrably revered. So, what can we cautiously infer from this collection of silent clues? We cannot proclaim the Indus Valley as a matriarchal utopia. Such a claim would be as speculative as the old invasion theories. But we can reasonably envision a social structure that was perhaps more complementary than hierarchical in terms of gender. The prevalence of female imagery, the equitable burial practices, and the nature of their craft-based economy all point toward a society where women likely held significant ritual, economic, and social standing. Their influence may have been exercised in the household, the workshop, and in local spiritual practice, rather than in a centralized palace. This interpretation feels consistent with the broader ethos we have observed, a culture that invested in communal infrastructure and civic order over the glorification of individual male rulers. When we look at those figurines now, we might try to see beyond the label of goddess. We might instead see a reflection of a society that frequently pictured its women, that interred them with respect, and whose celebrated craftsmanship provided a natural avenue for female agency. The silence of the script forces us to listen more carefully to the archaeology, and it whispers a possibility of a world where the contributions of half its people were woven into the civilization's sturdy, everyday cloth. That small soapstone seal in your hand feels cool and surprisingly heavy, a dense little rectangle of meaning. On its surface, the image of a powerful, bovine creature stands in profile, its single, curved horn giving it the familiar but misleading name of the Indus unicorn. Below it, a short line of elegant, indecipherable script marches across the stone. For over a century, we have called these objects seals, and that is certainly one of their functions. They were pressed into soft clay to mark bales of goods, locking a shipment or authenticating a storage jar. But to see them only as ancient stamps or signatures is to miss their deeper, more intimate role. These were personal objects, carried on the body, perhaps on a cord around the neck or kept in a pouch. The backs are often pierced with a boss for stringing, and many show a beautiful, polished sheen from constant handling. This suggests they were more than administrative tools, they were possessions of deep significance. So what else might they have been? One compelling theory casts them as amulets, objects of spiritual protection. In a world without written prayers that we can read, carrying an image of a powerful, sacred animal could have been a way to invoke that creature's strength or favor. The bull, a recurring motif, symbolizes raw power and fertility across many cultures. The elephant suggests wisdom, memory, and royal authority. The rhinoceros, with its thick armored hide, embodies nearly invincible defense. To wear a seal carved with one of these animals might have been to carry a piece of that symbolic power with you, a private guardian for a merchant traveling far from home or an artisan working in a crowded workshop. Another possibility points to social and professional identity. In a vast, networked civilization without kings whose names we know, how did you signal who you were, what family you belonged to, or what craft you mastered? These seals may have served as tokens of affiliation. The specific combination of animal motif and script characters could have identified a particular clan, a merchant guild, or a lineage of priests. Think of it not as a signature, but as a heraldic crest, a miniature declaration of your place in the social tapestry. The unicorn, by far the most common motif, might not represent a mythical beast at all, but a specific, potent symbol for a dominant social or professional group whose influence stretched across the civilization. This brings us to the unicorn itself, the greatest symbolic puzzle of them all. It appears on the majority of seals, always in profile, often standing before a curious object that looks like a ritual stand or a manger. The creature is stylized, muscular, and clearly important, but its single horn is likely an artistic convention, showing a two-horned animal like an aurochs or a bull in perfect profile. Its overwhelming prevalence suggests it was not just any symbol, but the central symbol, a kind of cultural logo. Was it the emblem of a ruling council, the totem of a priestly class that managed the granaries and the Great Bath? Or perhaps it represented the concept of civilized order itself, the tamed strength that made urban life possible. Its constant companion, the mysterious stand-like object, only deepens the enigma. It could be a ceremonial incense burner, a trough, or an abstract symbol for a temple or a city. We see the pieces of the ritual, but the ceremony remains hidden. Holding one of these seals, then, is to hold a concentrated capsule of a lost world. It is at once a practical tool for commerce, a potential badge of office, a personal talisman, and a fragment of a symbolic language that communicated status, profession, and belief. The animal is not just decoration, it is a statement. The script is not just a label, it is a name or a title we cannot pronounce. In these miniature galleries of carved stone, the distilled their relationship with the natural world, their social structures, and their spiritual hopes. They offer us the most direct, tactile connection we have to the individuals of this civilization. We can feel the weight they felt, trace the carved lines their fingers traced, and stare into the same symbolic faces they look to for identity and protection. We share the object, but the meaning, the story it told about its owner, retreats behind a wall of silent symbols, a personal history written in a code for which we have lost the key. The true wealth of a civilization is measured not in gold, but in grain. Beneath the orderly streets of Harappa lay an even more fundamental order, a meticulously managed landscape of fields and orchards that fed millions. The dinner table was a testament to both agricultural genius and global connection, built on a foundation of two sturdy grains, wheat and barley. These were the staples, ground into flour for the flatbreads that would have been a daily food, baked in the clay ovens found in many homes. But their fields were far from monotonous. They cultivated a diverse and nutritious bounty, lentils and peas for protein-rich stews, mustard for oil and spice, and dates and melons for sweetness. One of their most revolutionary crops was not eaten at all. It was cotton, which they spun into the lightweight textiles that became a coveted export across the ancient world. This agricultural diversity was a deliberate strategy, a hedge against the failure of any single crop, and a way to create a balanced, resilient diet. Their fields did not work alone, they were partnered with a menagerie of domesticated animals. The sturdy, humped zebu cattle were likely the engines of the farm, used for plowing and for their milk. Water buffalo provided dairy and strength for heavy labor, while sheep and goats supplied wool, meat, and milk. Perhaps most transformative for future human history is clear evidence they raised chickens, making them among the very first people to domesticate the fowl that would circle the globe. This combination of crops and livestock created a sophisticated, integrated agricultural system that turned the Indus floodplain into a breadbasket. But growing the food was only half the challenge. The other half was defending it from the very river that made it possible. To protect their precious surplus from the annual floods, they engineered massive raised brick platforms, the granaries. These were not simple sheds, they were strategic reserves, with clever ventilation ducts to keep the grain cool and dry for years. The granary at it could have held enough food to feed tens of thousands, a public insurance policy against lean years. This ability to store wealth in the form of food was the critical precondition for everything else. It freed a large portion of the population from daily farming, allowing them to become the potters, bead makers, merchants, and administrators who built the cities. The entire civilization, with its grid plans and trade routes, was ultimately built on the security of a full stomach. Their culinary world even hints at pleasures beyond mere sustenance. Archaeologists have found remnants of fishing nets and bone hooks, pointing to meals from the river and the sea. A type of large, brick-lined pit found in some sites is thought to be a tandoor, an oven still used today across the region for baking bread and roasting meats, suggesting a continuity of culinary tradition that spans. The vibrant markets of it would have been a sensory feast, the earthy smell of grains, the sweet scent of dates, the sharp aroma of mustard oil, and the colorful displays of pulses and fruits. This stable, abundant, and surprisingly diverse food system was the quiet, indispensable engine of their success. It allowed them to look beyond the horizon of the next harvest and dream in city blocks and sea lanes, proving that the first step to building a world is always to reliably feed the people in it. The last resident to leave likely closed a wooden door for the final time and did not look back. There was no enemy at the gate, no final conflagration. The silence that fell over the city was not sudden, but cumulative, the slow draining of sound until only the wind remained. Imagine walking those grid-patterned streets in those final decades. The covered drain running past your home is partially clogged, a section of its elegant brickwork cracked and patched with rubble. The great public well in your neighborhood still holds water, but it is deeper and harder to draw from than your grandparents remember. In the marketplace, the merchant scales are still used, but the perfect chert weights are occasionally replaced by cruder imitations, close enough for a local trade that has grown smaller, more insular. The long-distance caravans from the highlands arrive less frequently, and the exotic lapis lazuli that once passed through here is now a rare luxury. This is the causal collapse in human terms, not a single disaster, but a cascade of quiet failures. The weakening monsoons meant smaller harvests, straining the granaries that were the city's economic heart. The disrupted trade meant a loss of wealth, and the vital materials, like tin and timber, needed for maintenance and prestige. As resources dwindled, the social contract that demanded everyone contribute to cleaning the drains or repairing the public buildings simply frayed. Why invest your labor in a city-wide system when your own family's next meal is uncertain? The authority of the councils or guilds, which derived power from managing abundance, evaporated in the face of scarcity. People did not flee in a panicked exodus. They made a series of rational, heartbreaking decisions over generations. One season, a family might decide to send their younger sons to join kin in a smaller settlement closer to a reliable spring. A potter, finding no market for fine painted ware, might pack their tools and follow the migrating populations eastward. Neighborhood by neighborhood, the city's lifeblood seeped away. The final abandonment was less an event and more a fading, like a lamp whose oil is slowly exhausted. The last few inhabitants became caretakers of a ghost town, living in a few repaired houses amid the echoing shells of empty neighborhoods. Then one day, even they were gone. The wind then began its long work, blowing dust and sand through the empty doorways. Silt from the unpredictable river settled in the abandoned streets. The baked brick walls, so resistant to the elements, slowly crumbled under their own weight without hands to maintain them. The city was not destroyed. It was gently taken back, layer by layer, until the mounds that remained gave no hint of the geometric order beneath. This prolonged farewell is why the ruins were found so intact, frozen not in a moment of violence, but in a state of gradual relinquishment. The people did not vanish, they dispersed, carrying the seeds of their culture, their pottery styles, their bead-making skills, and their stories into the Ganges basin and beyond. They left behind the grand experiment of urban living, choosing instead the resilience of smaller, adaptable communities. The city's final gift was its own peaceful ruin, a silent, sprawling question left buried in the earth for over 3,000 years, waiting for a future age to uncover it and wonder what happened. Their silent cities do not ask us to remember a king's name, but to reconsider what a civilization's true legacy should be. The Indus Valley presents a radical alternative to the traditional historical narrative, one where advancement is measured in sewers and standardized weights rather than pyramids and epic poems. Their vanishing act is perhaps the most profound part of their story, for it was not an erasure, but a slow, deliberate transformation. They did not disappear from the earth, they dissolved into it, their people, their crafts, and their quiet innovations flowing into the cultural bloodstream of South Asia, influencing everything from spiritual symbols to the rhythm of village life for to come. Their greatest lesson is one of humility and interdependence. They built a world of stunning ingenuity, a masterpiece of social engineering, yet it remained utterly dependent on a delicate and ultimately shifting balance with the rivers and the sky. Their resilience was remarkable, but it had limits. They remind us that no civilization, no matter how brilliantly designed, is an island. Its fate is tethered to the environment it seeks to master, a partnership that requires constant, attentive negotiation. When we walk the grid patterns of our own modern cities, we are walking in their footsteps. When we benefit from public sanitation or rely on fair measures in commerce, we are touching the edges of their vision. They challenge us to look beyond the stone monuments that typically dominate history books and to see the deeper architecture of human cooperation. The true endurance of a society may lie not in the longevity of its palaces, but in the persistence of its good ideas, in the quiet, practical wisdom that gets passed down, adapted, and reborn in new forms. Their silent streets pose a timeless question: what will future archaeologists deduce about us from our foundations? Will they find evidence of a society that invested in the collective well-being of its people, or one that built monuments to its own fleeting power? The Indus Valley civilization may have left no epic tales, but in its enduring mystery and its quiet, revolutionary blueprint for living together, it has given us one of history's most compelling and necessary stories. If this journey into their lost world has sparked your curiosity, the exploration continues. Subscribe to join us as we uncover more of history's greatest enigmas, and let us know in the comments what aspect of the mystery intrigues you the most.